oftentimes that order starts to fall into disorder. And that's the dark night of the soul. That's the pit of despair. That's the kicking and screaming of like, oh my God, it's all falling apart. Everything I've built up around me. So the order falls into disorder. And he said, the beauty is that now you have the ability to consciously reorder life around who you really are. That was huge. So again, working with a lot of people who come at a space of, wow, things are not the way they used to be. I don't feel secure anymore. My life seems to be really shifting. That's a great book. Falling upward. And that we grow through our falling. And of course, every classic hero's journey, every mythical story is going to talk about life was good, it turned to shit, and then through that, I was able to actually address what needed to be addressed so I could heal and grow.
Hey, listeners, and welcome back to Third Way's podcast. It's I'm doing this from LA, and today, but still virtual. And today I'm with Chess Edwards. Chess was part of our inaugural coaching certification program. We'll talk about that further throughout this podcast. And he is also a Sedona-based spiritual guide and meditation teacher with whom divine consciousness has awakened and continues to expand. Chess has over 40 years of experience guiding people into stronger, deeper, and more vibrant relationships with themselves, their work, and the world that they live in. And as a champion of the human spirit, he is dedicated to helping his clients and students step powerfully into their full potential as they learn to trust and embody their innate perfection and brilliance. Chess, great intro. I'm pulling up your website. It's phenomenal. It's very good.
I think some of it might even be accurate.
Yeah. It's good to have you here. I'm glad we can record one of our many conversations in public. We've been talking quite a bit the last 6 months or so with the program.
Indeed, I just really appreciate the opportunity. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It'll be fun. So let's talk about you a little bit just to start, just so that our audience is a bit more familiarity with you. You know, what's been your path to awakening?
I think it's often helpful to start with, what is this current state of being or state of awareness? And the easiest way I can describe it is that there is a pretty stable peace now in the awareness of all that's happening around, all that's happening in here, all that's happening in the emotional bubbling, all that's happening, just a presence of witnessing, of awareness. And that wasn't the case for most of my life. And I think it's probably common that many who are drawn to a sense of wholeness, a sense of belonging, a sense of safety, which the awakening of awareness can reveal that we're already that wholeness. That is often come to because of a lot of pain, a lot of difficulty, a lot of struggle. There's that beautiful teaching that says if you want something and you really are devoted to it, like I want to be at peace, life will say, oh, okay, let me show you all the ways you're not at peace. So the path really to here started in a youth of a lot of dysfunction, a youth of neglect and abandonment and some betrayal, some abuse, not at the hands of my parents. I want to make that real clear. But it created an egoic sense of self, an identity that didn't feel at all safe in the world. Just felt really, really uncertain about where my place was, if I was okay. Classics. Am I lovable? Am I all right? Am I enough? And so I was going through life just basically by the skin of my teeth, just trying desperately to feel okay, just to feel okay. And so drugs started really early in my life, age of 13, just started smoking a lot of pot. And in those days, that was back in the 70s, so Quaaludes, and at that time, mushrooms as well. My first experience with acid, at way too young of ages, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I was just trying to escape the fear that I felt. So that tracked through my life in various ways. And I got to the point right around in my early 40s or so, mid 40s, where I finally went, I gotta address this. So I started to find teachers, I started to find guides, and a group that I belonged to for a while, doing the personal development work, starting to get clear on why I felt the way I felt, why I acted the way I acted and behaved the way I behaved. And started to learn for the first time, oh, that has to do with your childhood. Like, that was a revelation to me. And getting clear, oh, that was my dad's stuff, or that was my, of course I felt afraid. Of course I defended my heart. And started going through the process of relieving a bit of the anxiety that was built up in my egoic construct of self. And I found, Paul, that after years of doing that, there was this one group I belonged to. We got together every 3 months, maybe every 4 months, but multiple times through the year. And it involved substance. We worked originally with a shamanic guide, and we would do ma and different versions of ayahuasca and MDMA and different substances to help drop out of the classic default mode network of thinking about self and feel something differently. And it was valuable, hugely valuable. But the guides in that experience, they were never talking about spirituality. They were only looking primarily at the personal self. How do you heal the childhood wounds? How do you start to work with the person that I have created in my own mind? So hugely valuable. But after a while, I realized it wasn't scratching the itch. I was going back to do another round with the group, and I was feeling guilty. I'm like, how is it that I'm going back with some of the same questions, some of the same stuff, working on it again and again and again? And it's easing, but it's still very much there. And I remember framing it as, I feel like I'm going back to God and tugging on the sleeve of God and saying, hi, me again. Can we go over this again? I promise I'll try to hold on to it this time. And then I realized, because I was starting to find teachers in the world of non-duality and in the world of self-realization. And I was starting to recognize there was another self beyond the egoic self I was working with. And I realized, wait, I'm not going back and tugging on the sleeve of God. I've never been to God, not consciously, not with awareness. That shifted everything. That's when I started to take my personal development and bring it together with spiritual development. And that's made all the difference. And it's what infuses my work today, is to be able to say, yes, work on the temporary personal construct of self, the egoic self that's been built over a lifetime, programmed, conditioned. Work on that. But also come into arrested grace in the you that transcends that, in the eternal you that won't end when this egoic self ends. And it just makes the personal development work so much easier when I can be with myself and the different things that arise in my psyche from a rested state of, no, I'm all right. I know who I really am now. And that's embodied. That's present. So that embodied self of peace, of wholeness, of grace, is now the more forward self. And the egoic self has really loosened up, doesn't feel the pressure of needing to be the dominant identity, and is now able to fall into the background more in service to the divine play of God consciousness and soul, doing this divine dance.
I love it. And psychedelics help with that, right? They help, as does breath work, as does meditation, as does fasting. There are many ways to come into that awareness, to wake up, so to say. What for you, what have been, besides psychedelics, let's start there, besides psychedelics, what have been tools for you to continue in that awareness or cultivate or develop that awareness? Right? Where are some of your foundational learnings from? And some of those are going to be psychedelics because you have been working with them in various ways and shapes and forms for many years as well.
Yeah. I think I'll start with the psychedelics aspect of that. I stopped using any psychedelics for about 10 years because I was finding that my main practice had turned to meditation. And that was what was guiding me into the deep knowings, the spaciousness, the vastness of pure consciousness. And then the psychedelics for me were starting to almost interrupt that. They were muddling my experience to some degree, but only because I wasn't trained yet in how to actually use them. I was just kind of taking them and we'll see what happens. And now I'm on a solid microdosing protocol. I regularly journey with various psychedelics to really open to different levels of consciousness that aren't as available to me in the quote normal state. So psychedelics now play a really significant and beautiful role in my journey. But really and one of the primary modalities that I utilize with the people I work with and that is primary in my life is the combination of study. So engaging again and again and again and again in the conversations with teachers. Rupert Spira, Adyashanti, Gangaji, Muji, these different teachers who are all speaking the same thing, which is helping to remember who am I really. So the study and then the meditation upon those studies. So marinating in something that lands in the study and going, ooh, that analogy of sky and weather, and I'm actually the sky and the weather is just passing. Thoughts, emotions are passing, and I'm the awareness of sky. Well, that may come in a teaching, and then for months to sit and marinate, let it drop in, let it embody, let it move from a concept into an actual experience of being. So that's the primary modality, is really study and meditation.
For you, where does breath come into that?
So breathwork is one of the newer modalities that I've started to work with. I was introduced to breathwork through being a participant and was just blown away by how in an hour of focused breathing, I could just release so much and I could allow so much feeling and energy to move through me. The Vipassana meditations teach that everything arises so that it may pass. And in the breath work, so much could arise and move energetically, just the humming of energy through my body, through emoting, vocal emoting, letting go of grief, of anger, allowing myself to sob deeply, allowing myself to just laugh uncontrollably, just to let whatever was needed to be present to move through me. That was my first experience of breath work, was a series of breath works by a local practitioner. And I thought, well, I'm a coach and I've now experienced breath work. I can just start leading breath work, with people. And I'm really glad I didn't. So I reached out to this practitioner and got trained and went through a full couple of months of deep training in this work. And now it is one of the modalities that I use on a regular basis with the people I work with. I'll often have people come and spend 2 days with me here in Sedona 3 different times. And then we have the connection, coaching, and counseling sessions in between those visits. And usually the first visit is a breathwork journey. That's one of the principal foundational parts of that, besides the teachings and the meditations, is the breathwork journey. The second visit will often be more of a psychedelic journey, a plant medicine journey. And then with the third, we see what is best at that time. But I work with every client. Breathwork is a central part of the experience for them to be able to drop out of the mind and into a surrendered space of activating energy, activating emotions, and seeing what needs to move.
So I read this book, Breath, The New Signs of a Lost Art by James Nestor. Have you heard about this book?
Mm-mm.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
No.
So I've been studying quite a bit about the physiological elements of breathing, right? In other words, nose breathing versus mouth breathing, right? If you mouth breathe, you die. You don't die, but it's not healthy. And there have been many indigenous traditions that have specifically encouraged nose breathing because they recognize, right? Andrew Weil then came and talked about this in the 90s, and now there's, Wim Hof and all of the science around breath and the importance of breathing. Some of it is very physiological, like I said, like some of it is about sympathetic, parasympathetic, or about anxiety, or, neurotransmitters, how you can work with them, what happens with norepinephrine, what happens with, dopamine. But a lot of it with breathwork is, it's almost like, it's certainly a practice, but like an emotional practice in a way, because it's teaching so much about how to let go. And, my breathwork experiences range from holotropic to Wim Hof to transformational breathwork. What for you feel, and then, like I said, just learning to nose breathe, right? Into the actually basics of how I'm breathing every day. What have you learned about breath through breathwork yourself?
I think one of the most fascinating things is how little we typically do breathe. That most adults are breathing at about 30% of their functional capacity. And
30%?
30% of our functional capacity.
Absurd.
It really is. And the fascinating way that I've found to describe that is that we learned it as babies. That babies, they're not breathing in a limited way. They're not guarding their breath. They're breathing in like whatever they feel, and they're fully expressing it. No doubt about it. But a baby, when they're expressing, and the first expressions are a bit of uncertainty or fear or discomfort, so they're crying. Even the most loving parent is saying to the young crying baby, shh, 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 shh. No, 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 no. Shh, shh, shh. No, 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 no. Calm, control, bring it in, hold it in. And you watch the babies respond. They're crying, and then they get this instruction, and they know, I need to learn how to be in this world from these people who clearly have been here longer than I have. And they listen, and you watch them. They're crying, and they get the instruction. Shh, shh, shh. And they go, okay. And they come into the shallow breath. And then as we start to become adults, we breathe in a way that I call a guarded inhale and a cautious exhale. We've learned to guard what we let in. Hey, I let in love before. I let in trust before. I let in, and it hurt, and I got betrayed, and I don't want that to happen again. So we start breathing in kind of a guarded way, and then we exhale in a cautious way. Careful what I say, careful what I do, careful how I express. I may be judged, I may be abandoned, the classics. And so most adults, whether they know it or not, are walking through life going, it's this guarded, shallow way. It's a protection mechanism. And it's part of what we learned as babies. So in the breath work, when we're breathing fully for a full hour, it's a permissive state. It's where we're given permission to feel, to express, to be, and to let it move. And it's like a baby crying. And what if the parent was saying, oh yeah, baby, come on, bring it. Yeah. What else you got? So I love the fact that the breath helps us feel more alive and that it does indeed activate those higher levels of consciousness that are being suppressed by the anxious mind, by the defended thought patterns. I got to be careful about who I am and how I am. Let that go. And we open that kind of, it's like the concrete growing over a flower that wants to grow. And we loosen that rigid way of thinking, the way you put it so beautiful. It de-rigifies that sense of being and allows the blossoming of what's present. And the main teaching I find in breathwork is breathwork doesn't create anything. It reveals what is already present. And it may reveal bliss. It may reveal sadness. It may reveal resistance. Sometimes people come out of breathwork, they're like, I never was able to let go. I kept drifting out of the breath. I couldn't do it. It's like, beautiful. That was a perfect breathwork session. How does that show up in your life? Yeah.
Do you get tetany when you do breathwork?
Sometimes, less and less. And for those who don't know, tetany is the T-Rex hands,
Right, yeah.
And I'll be in breathwork sometimes and just it starts cramping up. And I found that vocal emoting tends to release it more than anything.
Okay.
Because energy is trying to move. And if I'm not allowing myself just to express, because there's an embarrassment about what if I yelled? What if I cried? What if I really let this go? My baby self is going, oh, that's not safe. If I don't let it go, that energy is trying to release and I'm not letting it. Mm. And as soon as I start to really emote vocally, then that starts to release. Mm. And the vocal sound we train with is ah, really a pure ah sound, because it's one of the most natural sounds we make as humans. It's why we say amen. Mm. It's why so many names of God have ah, Allah, Jehovah. Mm. Why the Native Americans say ah, so. Or aho.
Allah, too.
Yeah, Allah. So is when in breath work, if you can let the as a bliss sound or as an anger sound, frustration. And that I find, Paul, is the most difficult thing for people in breath work.
Is the
is the emotional, is the vocal expression of allowing what they're feeling to actually be unabashedly released and expressed. It gets caught in the throat often, We're all invited. All right, let's bring some awe into this. I'll notice them clenching and holding. Let go. What are you feeling? Let it go with the awe. And they'll be like, ah. It's really interesting how tightly wound so many of us are.
When I first did breathwork, it was 2017. I went to a place called Rhythmia, which is where I drank ayahuasca for the first time.
Down in Costa Rica?
Down in Costa Rica. And immediately, I remember getting tetany. And I remember getting tetany probably for a few times after that as well. At some point along the way, I just stopped getting it. And I don't remember when and where. And also, it could be that a lot of the breath work I'm doing now is Wim Hof breath work, not necessarily the holotropic breath work. There also seems to be a difference there. Like the breath work I've done in preparation for plant medicine usually goes a lot deeper than the performance breath work, although not always. There's ways to work with both. And what I find is you just naturally teach yourself through that process to, like you said, breathe better, to use maybe 70 to 80% instead of just 30%, right? And also, the breath is the best teacher for presence, which a lot of this work, or a lot of this becoming is about just presence, present moment awareness. So,
I find with it when the technically lessons over time, it is typically because we're trusting more as well. It's not only the different types of breath and what it's doing physiologically within our body, but also the trust, the learning to surrender, learning to let go, learning to let the energy move, to not bottle it up. Yeah. So I find it to be one of the really powerful psychedelics, as we were talking about earlier, that term that I learned from you, that psychedelic is to have the soul self revealed, have the full self revealed, have the full psyche revealed or shown. So psychedelics, anything that gives us that knowing is a psychedelic. So breathwork is a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, we were talking about the definition, right? So Humphrey Osmond was writing a letter to Aldous Huxley and included this word psychedelic in it. And a lot of people think of it as mind manifesting, but the word psyche, in Greek, there is no connection or no disconnection between the mind and the body. It's really the full self, so to say, the essence, the soul essence. So really it means soul manifesting, which I think is so relevant to the sort of what we call the creative orientation or leadership or self-actualization or self-realization or kind of insert whatever phrase, mystic or whatever phrase you want to put in there. And so that trust is the foundation of that, right? Because it allows for that exploration. For you, I'm curious, Chess, when and how did you make the transition from, let's say, healing to growth?
That's a good question. I've never heard it asked in that way. The healing was when I didn't have any awareness of a self beyond my egoic self. So I was healing the crappy way my construct of self got put together. I was deconstructing that and healing it and trying to put it back together in different ways, and healthier, more honest ways of that I'm not unworthy, that I am okay, that I do belong. But those were still mental concepts that I was applying. And it moved from the healing of the personal self, again, which is necessary and I'll continue for the rest of my life, to the growth into what I already am. And it was just the growth is the allowing of the full psyche, the soul self, to grow, to appear, to blossom, because it's not being dampened, it's not being veiled by the noise of constant self-reflection through the egoic mind. And that happened when I started to find teachers. That happened when I started to study non-duality, self-realization, and started to work with and devote myself. That was one of the big parts of it, was a devotion. I finally went, all right, that's it. I am devoting myself to this knowing of my being. I don't know what that means yet, but I know that I'm not just my mind. I don't have any sense of what else there is, and I want to start to know that. So I devoted myself through the meditative practice and now through the psychedelic and breathwork practice to awaken that which I already am. So it happened when I started to find teachers around non-duality and self-realization.
What role has Ram Dass played as a teacher in that?
Yeah, he's played a more recent role. It's been very interesting. I'm a little bit almost embarrassed that I didn't really understand the depth and the breadth of his journeys and his beautiful clarity and playfulness and humility in how he teaches and shares until probably this last year. Before that, my main teachers were Rupert Spira and Adyashanti and Muji Gangaji. Those are my main teachers. Ram Dass, man, I'm listening to him a lot these days. And we did a journey together with the CCP group. And toward the end of the journey, you played the Sitting Around the Fire by Ram Dass. I use that a lot now in my journeys with people as well. That is such a beautiful piece of articulation of truth and delivered with such grace and kindness. So Ram Dass has really been a teacher in humility and kindness and playfulness. And allowing. That's the word that is the most present in my work today for myself and with those I work with is allowing. To be in the grace of allowing. And Ram Dass says, everything on your plate is the stuff of your enlightenment. Everything. He's got he says on the second visit to India to be with his guru, who he wasn't looking for a guru, and he found one. And he was clear. He said, a teacher is a teacher of the truth. A guru is the truth. That's the difference. A teacher points to truth, helps guide to truth. A guru is the absolute embodiment of that truth. So on his second trip to visit his guru said, Ram Dass, love everybody. And Ram Dass felt into it and he went, I can't. My mind is so full of judgments. And his teacher said, good, then that is your sadhana. To meet your judgments again and again and again until you've seen them all, until you recognize them all, and you love them all. Give them space, give them room to release if they're ready to release. So that humility of admitting and owning and saying, yeah, I am a human being. I'm a human being exploring, and I'm a spiritual being exploring through this human experience, but I am human as well. He also said recently, which I loved, well, I heard it recently. He hasn't really said anything recently. But I heard it recently. He said, I've been doing this for 25 years, and his path is obviously very deep and wide and with much devotion. He says, I've been doing this for 25 years. He goes, I have not lost one of my neuroses. It's just that now when they come, they appear, they blip. There's no fertile ground for them to rest in. It's like water off a duck's back. They just show up. And then they don't. They show up less frequently with less ferocity. But he goes, I haven't lost them. They're still there. So I love his humility.
Yeah, he was a very special person. His the whole story with him and Timothy Leary is just ridiculous in so many ways. And his path after that, from Richard Alpert to Ram Dass and the gurus in India, and then he lived in Hawaii for a very long time and taught from there. And what's interesting now there's a lot of musicians like the one that we had in Ceremony, right? That was part of a larger album by John Hopkins, this music for psychedelic therapy that he's now released. It was, it's been interesting to see how artists have reintegrated his teachings now into music for psychedelics even, right? So it's kind of a full circle, because he moved away from psychedelics for, in the public eye. I mean, I'm sure he was still dropping acid and, but anyway, so.
Yeah. Well, he saw it for what it was. It was just another modality, another opportunity to open.
I mean, he lived a long time though. He lived into his late 90s. And lived a very good life. What a man. And now he's still, he'll be on YouTube and in podcasts with us forever. That's the great thing about technology, is his presence is still here, like many.
And that album with East Forest.
The one with East Forest did an entire, a lot more.
Oh, my! Every song on that is just beautiful. His teachings, his conversations, and then with the musical background holding the space and for it. It's just powerful.
So powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, slight change of pace. Chess, Chess, 5 books. 5 books that have been influential in who you've become.
Okay, now I'm really going to be embarrassed. I read less and less. It's very interesting. So one of them is called the presence process by Michael Brown. I don't think I'm working with anybody who I haven't recommended that book. It's a 10-week process that takes one through. You read a chapter a week, and it takes one through a really deep understanding of how the egoic self got put together. Conditioning, programming, projections, unconditional love. It just really speaks to how we got put together the way we did in our minds, and how to do some work around, okay, I'm triggered today, but it's not my 60-year-old who's actually triggered. It's my unhealed 10-year-old. Oh, why is my 10-year-old still afraid? What's he believing? And so to track where my triggered response or reaction came from, and to identify what was the programming, what are the words around it, and when did it get implanted, so I can go back and do a little rewiring, a little work around that younger self. So the presence process was significant. I went to Bali for about 3 months when I was 50. And one of my mentors said, "Oh, you're going to go away for 3 months. Here, take this book." First time I read it, blew me open. And then I did that process. I finished the book. 4 months later, I went through that 10-week process again. And Paul, I was reading stuff in the book going, "Oh my God, that's fascinating." There was no way that was in there the first time I read the book. Just that I wasn't ripe yet. I wasn't ready for it yet. And then I did it again. I did it 4 different times. So that book is huge. Another one is a recent book by Richard Rohr, R-H-O-R, he used to be a Benedictine monk, and is just a beautiful teacher. And it's called Falling Upward. And it's been very helpful at this mid-stage of my life to read a book that speaks about how that in an early part of life you have order that you're usually born into: family, culture, often religion, and then order that you create because you don't know any better, early careers, maybe your own family that you create. But oftentimes that order starts to fall into disorder. And that's the dark night of the soul. That's the pit of despair. That's the kicking and screaming of like, oh my God, it's all falling apart. Everything I've built up around me. So the order falls into disorder. And he said, the beauty is that now you have the ability to consciously reorder life around who you really are. That was huge. So again, working with a lot of people who come at a space of, wow, things are not the way they used to be. I don't feel secure anymore. My life seems to be really shifting. That's a great book. Falling Upward. And that we grow through our falling. And of course, every classic hero's journey, every mythical story is going to talk about life was good, it turned to shit, and then through that, I was able to actually address what needed to be addressed so I could heal and grow.
I'm pulling up a quote from Richard Rohr, which I will read. So it's called Between Two Worlds. He wrote this right after COVID, April 26, 2020, and it's about liminal space. And I'll just read a little. It's short. It's not incredibly long. Yeah, here we go. Liminal space is an inner state and sometimes an outer situation where we can begin to think and act a new way. It is where we are betwixt and between, having left one room or stage of life, but not yet entered the next. We usually enter liminal space when our former way of being is challenged or changed, perhaps when we lose a job or a loved one, during illness, at the birth of a child, or a major relocation. It is a grace time, but often does not feel graced in any way. In such space, we are not certain or in control. This global pandemic we now face is an example of an immense collective liminal space. The very vulnerability and openness of liminal space allows room for something genuinely new to happen. We are empty and receptive, erased tablets waiting for new words. Liminal space is where we are most teachable, often because we are most humbled. Liminality keeps us in an ongoing state of shadow boxing instead of ego confirmation, struggling with the hidden side of things and calling so-called normalcy into creative question. In liminal space, we sometimes need to not do and not perform, according to our usual successful patterns. We actually need to fail abruptly and deliberately falter to understand other dimensions of life. I imagine that if you've never heard the word liminal before, you likely have a sense of what I'm talking about. It would be difficult to exist in this time of global crisis and not feel caught between at least two worlds, the one we knew and the one to come. Our consciousness and that of future generations has been changed. We cannot put the genie back in the bottle. I shorten that a little bit. I'll post the full thing in the podcast notes. It's liminal space between two worlds. So phenomenal. Right. And
that's why I love him.
That sense of holding the shadow with the light, right? The recognition of I gotta find you. Where are you, Jess? Hold on. Okay. That recognition, like what he says, shadow boxing instead of ego confirmation. I think that's such a powerful term and tool, right? Because a lot of times in the more spiritual spaces, there can be a predisposition towards spiritual bypassing, and the work of dying sometimes to be reborn is part of staying in touch with that shadow, right? And this is something that was brought up for me as well when you were speaking earlier, the role of wildness, and what's the relationship between wildness and divinity. One person I've been thinking, not person, but God, Dionysus, the Greek god, and thinking about how did he embody that? There's a relationship between wildness and divinity. I think it's fascinating. What is wildness? I mean, when I say that, what comes up for you? The wildness and divinity part.
To be okay with the unknown, to embrace the unknown, to accept the unknown, to accept and embrace the mortality, the danger, the dark. I spent 25 or 30 years leading adventure travel trips all around the world. And that, the wildness of possible avalanches or rockfall or dying while climbing or river rafting, class 5 rapids, all that, the prospect of dying in that world was safer to me than being in the world of humans. But it taught me how to then come to a sense of trust in being in the wild world of humans and the uncertainty of humans, because there's all manner of, the egoic identity doing a lot of weird stuff out there. But wildness, it's for me, it's giving myself to the moment and saying allowing each step as I'm moving, trekking in Nepal, not knowing exactly where I'm going. All I can do is be present in the moment and aware. All of my senses come alive in wildness. I'm present to feeling, smelling, sensing, seeing, hearing. I'm in tune with a wild world. I think we've gotten way too comfortable, and so that spiritual bypass is moving from the comfort of maybe addiction or denial to the comfort of spirituality, and not allowing that liminal space of the, oh man, I don't have anything to hold on to right now. There's nothing to grasp onto right now, which can be so much the experience in meditation and in psychedelics and in breathwork. So, that surrendered space.
Yeah, it comes back to the letting go, right? The breath, again, the breath.
Let go. Who's the one who doesn't want to let go? The one who doesn't trust. The sense of self that goes, I don't trust that I'm going to be okay with whatever happens to show up. And to find that rested state of grace. I love it. He said, in that reading, there was one line about, it's a graceful state that doesn't feel like it has any grace in it whatsoever. Yeah, to be the fool, to be the one who doesn't know, to be the one who's willing to say, all right, I'm willing to get a bit beat up. I wrote a blog about this many years ago about how I would never hire a carpenter that didn't have, banged up knuckles and maybe a missing finger or two, and I wouldn't bet on a boxer who had a straight nose. I'd bet on a boxer who'd been beat up in the past. So to allow ourselves to get beat up so that we can find our faith, we can find our strength, and we go, wow, I survived that. Wow, I have the capacity to show up, in an uncertain world.
Right. And also I think it's both basically the inner sense of trust and confidence and knowing, which can often comes from healing work or just being loved as, I was fortunate enough that growing up, I had a lot of love from my family, care, support. Most of my trauma was just related to ostracization within a peer group at school, right? But that was like 5th, 6th grade. So that I guess that sense of love as a foundation that enables the going out and having a willingness to get more beat up is what I felt, right? Because you feel like there's a certain level of privilege that you've come into the world with, and that what privilege in many ways equates to responsibility. How are you going to use that privilege? How are you going to create with that to give to take on maybe something that's more difficult and challenging because you can, and that's part of the living. It's what creates a fulfilling existence is taking on challenges, not making things difficult. And I want to clarify, it's not that you're making things difficult for yourself. It's that you're willing to go through things that maybe most other people wouldn't be willing to. And there's a reciprocation there with this sort of meaning and fulfillment that you get out of life from that.
And that your identity, who you really are, is not dependent on whether you succeed or not, or whether you fail or not.
Right.
That for me was a big part of the journey, was starting to recognize that inadequacy in any moment or in any endeavor, if there was inadequacy in that didn't actually reflect upon my divinity, my divine self. Rudyard Kipling has a beautiful poem from If, and one line from the poem is, if we can meet with our triumphs and our disasters, and treat them both as the imposters that they are. There's times I'm going to get beat up. There's times I'm going to get it wrong. There's times I'm going to absolutely, totally mess up. There's other times that there's going to be a brilliance and a grace. Mm-hmm. And none of it really reflects upon my true soulful self that is just here to learn, just here to grow, that's here to take every opportunity. And no, it's already in a divine grace. And now it can play. That's a big thing. It just, for life becomes much more playful, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So much more playful. CCP, Chess, tell us about CCP. Why did you enroll in CCP? So CCP, I will clarify for our listeners, is not the Chinese Communist Party. Chess is, as far as I know, is not a communist.
That's why I enrolled. I thought it was a Chinese Communist Party.
Like, sign me up.
Turned out it wasn't.
What could be better? Death camps. No, seriously. So it's the coaching certification program, right, that we have through Third Wave. And Chess, we have a mutual friend. And it was funny, a close mutual friend, I would say. Mm-hmm. It's funny, when and Amy has been on the podcast too before. So when she mentioned that she was catching up with you as an old friend, and she goes, yeah, and just mentioned this thing about your coaching program. And I didn't mention anything to him. I was like, oh, this is worlds colliding. Yeah. So it was meant to be. And, we immediately connected. And I'm just curious, like, in terms of your coach, we've talked a lot about psychedelics towards the beginning of this. Since then, we've gone into many other interesting avenues of conversation. But what for you is meaningful about psychedelics and coaching, and what was meaningful for you about the program itself and the people that you've met through the program, the connections you made, the learnings you've had?
So a 4-month program that I didn't know to what degree it was going to have the impact that it did. most of what I do in my work now has been touched, has been informed through that course. Some things are new. Some things are just things you was doing. I'm doing them differently now. The reason that I joined the CCP was because I recognized that, as I mentioned earlier, I was doing that work with the group using different substance, typically psychedelics, for all those years. And I reflected back on that, and I thought, if I had had guides that while I was doing that were actually helping me understand the spiritual nature of my being, the soul nature of my being, and not just doing the personal development, holy cow, that was a combination that I thought, that's huge. If I could take the work I'm doing now with the deep meditation and breath work and awakening as who we really are, that's a letting go. That's a real letting go of the egoic identity. It's the hardest part of this work. And I thought, well, wow, what if I took these teachings and this guidance and these meditations and added psychedelics that would allow people to more easily let go and have this direct experience? That's huge. And indeed, it's turned out to be the case. So that's why I joined, because I wanted to understand how to more consciously, ethically, professionally, and work with all these different medicines and the nuance of them. That's one of the things I loved about the program, is learning the difference between LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine, all these different medicines that can be used in different ways for different purposes. It's an art form. So I learned the art, and that was beautiful.
So we talk about it as a skill, right? So I'm curious, what did you learn about psychedelics, as a skill through the program, through the experiences you've gone through now over the last 6 months?
Well, set and setting. Really, the deep work leading into an experience. That's why I don't, like I said, I do programs where I'll meet with somebody for a 2-day retreat and then 3 months later, a second 2-day retreat. I don't typically do psychedelics in the first 2-day retreat. I want to understand really where this person's coming from, what they're working with. Have they ever done any trauma work before? Do they have deep trauma? And if I don't know that, and I'm just jumping them, okay, here's 2 grams of psilocybin, and then only then realize, oh my God, they've got deep trauma and they've never addressed it before, I probably moved them too quickly. So to understand the setting, the preparation, the sacredness, the sacred dynamics of these medicines and how to treat them as such was huge. And that brings me to one of the other books. So and you'll need to help me. The book was tremendous, but I can never remember the exact title, but it was
Path of Least Resistance?
No, the Conscious Evolution.
Consciousness Medicine?
Consciousness Medicine.
Yeah.
That was such a really humbling education in how to bring oneself really authentically and with great integrity into working with these medicines. So set and setting were huge, learning that. And then the integration on the back end to really recognize that there's so many more and more, as psychedelics are becoming more of a part of people's healing and awakening journeys. We both know there's enough times that people are rushed into an experience, they have the experience, and then they're just let go, and there's not very much integration. So to learn that role of being a really trained integrator of the psychedelic experience into one's life was huge. And also, I didn't even know, Paul, going into it, that there was a difference between sitting with somebody, delivering the medicine, holding a space for the medicine, sitting with the medicine, and then doing the integration. I didn't know that one could actually be a coach preparing somebody for a journey, turning them over to skilled sitters and deliverers of the medicine, letting them have their experience, and then re-engaging with our clients and then helping them integrate the experience. without having to be the one who actually sat with them through the experience. For instance, if they're doing ayahuasca, as we talked about the program, I'm never going to deliver ayahuasca. That's not my lineage. It's not my place. So to prepare a client for that, let them go through the experience held beautifully by somebody in their integrity around it, and then help them integrate afterwards. I didn't know that was a way of working with psychedelics.
And in some ways, if you have the training to facilitate and guide, let's say with psilocybin or MDMA or ketamine, right? It's nice to be the person who handles the prep experience and integration. There is benefit to that for sure. And that just is not always the case necessarily, because you have all these like Iboga and 5-MeO-DMT and San Pedro and peyote, right? Like, I mean, I may microdose with a few of those just on my own, but I'm not going to do any sort of significant journey. And yet sometimes that's relevant or, the right thing for a client that you're working with. And it also has to come down to like legal jurisdiction in terms of what's legal where, psilocybin or ayahuasca, or even 5 or whatever. So there's also navigating that landscape. Sometimes you have to send them to a retreat overseas if that's what they want.
And that was a big part of the program as well, starting to understand the legal landscape and the social landscape of and getting turned on to so many of the current studies. And as third wave, the whole third wave of psychedelics, starting to understand the history, where it got shut down in the 50s and 60s, and now it's how it's starting to open up again, and all the clinical studies and the scientific research that's going into this. That was huge. And the other part was the community. I went into it admittedly saying I'm not a real group guy. I'm a bit of a hermit. Just the beauty of being held in and a part of a group of people who are all so honest and courageous and in their hearts, and being able to have themselves revealed to themselves through other people's reflections, being able to have myself reflected back to me through the group experience. I'm now one of my main offerings is our group experiences, not just in the retreats, but like 4-month online experiences, because I understand the power of community now that I didn't understand that before.
Yeah, it seems to be front and center with a lot of this work in the psychedelic space and just emerging kind of business and tribe building. It's community first, everything else second, especially in a world that's become almost over digitized. People really seek that sense of connection, with people who are on a similar path. And that seems to continue to be the appealing part of programs like this. I mean, the training, the information is critical, obviously, and super important when you're working with substances like psychedelics, and you learn so much just from being in a community itself.
Well, yeah, we were able to tap into the community wisdom. Right. So there was the power and the wisdom of the lectures, of the teaching, of the guest faculty, of all that, and then the wisdom of the community. That was significant. It just really fleshed it all out so beautifully.
So, Chess, we're almost reaching the end of our hour. One last question for you. What are you feeling excited about at this point in time? What are you inspired to create?
I'm really, really, really turned on right now with the desire, and it's a real soulful desire. It's a real authentic juiciness that's coming forward within me that says, yeah, let's do this. And it's really working with healers, working with those who I'm calling conscious evolutionaries. And I love the fact that evolutionaries isn't a word you can find in the dictionary. But the working with people who are, in their own way, in their own modalities, playing a part to be a guide in the evolution of awakened consciousness, in the evolution of unification into the one loving awareness, loving consciousness, that I want to help support and provide programs, opportunities, courses that help people who are really working the edge and help them to get out of their own way and to more fully embrace and embody their own soulful expressions. Because I've come to recognize in this work for me that whenever we're working an edge, whenever we're guiding and leading in a way that is unfamiliar to the majority, when we're inviting people into a space that is not the norm, it's very vulnerable. That's where I would hit my edges of like, wait a minute, hold on. I might get rejected, classic fear. I might get abandoned again. People might withdraw their love if I get this wrong. So my joy right now is helping people to do their personal healing, awaken into their full grace, their full dimensionality of being, so that they can truly honor their soul's desires to be out there in the world, helping us all evolve, helping us all grow, helping us all, arrive in our authentic truth.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Chess, for joining us for the podcast. This is super fun. I'm glad we could drop in for the time that we got to drop in for. In terms of if people want to find out more about your work, it's chessedwards.com.
Yeah, pretty simple. So chessedwards.com is the website, and there's an opportunity there to book a complimentary 30-minute discovery call, or what I call a call to freedom. And so that's there as an opportunity. There's a couple of gifts as well, some guided meditations, another emotional vocabulary builder, which is a wonderful tool for helping people expand their vocabulary to describe what's happening within themselves. So there's free gifts on the site, and an opportunity to connect with me, to have a good conversation and see if our coming together would be of value to people. Also, I have a YouTube channel.
Oh, great.
And that's growing. I'm about to revamp it. I'm finding that a lot of the videos that I put up years ago, I might take them down. There's just this whole new body of work now that's emerging. But the YouTube channel is there too, and they just look up Chess Edwards on YouTube, and I'm the only one.
Beautiful. Chess Edwards on YouTube, chessedwards.com. Chess, thank you again for joining us for the podcast. This was an honor. It was great to interview you and learn.
Thank you, brother.
Learn so much. So just appreciate you.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate you, man. Everything you're doing and the edge that you're leading, and just the beautiful, playful, and open-hearted way you bring yourself to some really important work. And I'm excited for the new CCP group. That's amazing that it's growing, that it's expanding. And so whatever I can do to help.
Yeah. Thank you, Chess.
Thanks so much for watching. If you want to stay up to date on the third wave of psychedelics, subscribe to this channel and visit thethirdwave.co, where you'll find plenty of free resources on intentional and responsible psychedelic use.